Welcome to the Midweek message. We're taking some lessons from the book of Ecclesiastes. We're in chapter 1, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation of the Bible. And so in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, we begin reading in verse 12 and read through verse 15. I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done in the world. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. Everything under the sun is meaningless, like chasing the wind. What is wrong cannot be righted. What is missing cannot be recovered. These are the words of Solomon. So let's look at the verses individually. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 12. I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. Now, the King James Version of the Bible will say the preacher. This version says the teacher. The king lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done in the world. And so Solomon's great desire was to have wisdom. It was not to be wealthy. It was not to be powerful. It was to have wisdom to govern God's people. And that wisdom comes from God. The fear of God's the beginning of wisdom. And so he asked God for that when God gave him the option of asking for anything he wanted, and he would fulfill that wish. But Solomon wanted to have wisdom and understanding, so he devoted himself to that, and he tried to understand as much as he could of what was happening in the world. And this is the conclusion that he came to. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. And those words are all in verse 12. Now, why did Solomon reach that conclusion, that God had given mankind a tragic existence? Well, that's in verse 14. Everything under the sun is meaningless, like chasing the wind. How many times have you heard someone say, or maybe you yourself have said or thought, is it really worth it? Has my life been worth it? Has my career been worth it? Have I raised the kind of family that I want? Is what I have done with my life, is it worth it? Solomon said that the search for knowledge revealed to him the futility of things. And so he reached the conclusion that everything under the sun was meaningless. And he said, like chasing the wind, the more you try, the more you strive, the further your dreams are from you, the greater the extent of their elusiveness to you. The more you try, the less you think you really attain. And those of us who have lived a few years understand that as you get older, you realize what you don't know, and you realize what you haven't done, and you look back, and sometimes there's a little remorse or regret. Benjamin Disraeli said, youth is a mistake, middle age is a struggle, old age is a regret. And Solomon's looking back and he says, everything's meaningless. I sought to have wisdom, and life is like chasing the wind, and my dreams are just out of reach. And then in verse 15, what is wrong cannot be righted. What is missing cannot be recovered. Like chasing the wind, Solomon, why would you say that? Because you can't right wrongs. You can't take back words. You can't unring a bell. And as try as we might, we cannot stop the wrongs in the world. We cannot stop the wrongs in ourselves in a certain degree. But we see the same thing over and over and over. What is wrong, he said, cannot be righted, and what is missing cannot be recovered. Now, you've got a hole in you somewhere. I've got areas in which I've got a deficit. And try as we might, we struggle to fill what is missing. And Solomon said, I have tried to get wisdom. I try to understand the things of the world. But I came to the conclusion that life is a tragic existence. Everything is meaningless. Life is like chasing the wind. I cannot right the wrongs of my world or the wrongs that are in myself. And I cannot recover what is missing.